Food is a basic human necessity, yet millions of people around the world don't get enough or know when their next meal will come. How is this the reality for so many in 2024? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the United Nations has set the ambitious goal of reaching zero hunger by 2030. It's fair to say that we are a long way off. So, how can hunger be eliminated?
The COVID-19 pandemic affected economies, health, prosperity, but also food security. Global hunger remains far above pre-pandemic levels. Overall, 29.6% of the world's population, that's 2.4 billion people, were moderately or severely food insecure in 2022. More than 3.1 billion people couldn't afford a healthy diet in 2021. The projections suggest 600 million people will be undernourished by 2030.
Food is foundational to all aspects of development. Without secure access to a nutritious diet, nothing can be achieved. This is an absolutely critical moment, not just because this silent crisis is growing, but because we cannot separate it from other global crises.
The war in Ukraine impacted global agriculture, especially wheat. Conflicts in Gaza, Sudan, Yemen have severely restricted access to food. Rising temperatures and unpredictable weather are impacting the world's ability to grow and cultivate crops. Climate change is probably the biggest threat to food security. 2024 may be even worse for some farmers because of the El Niño weather pattern.
This year's farming season has been bad because rainfall was erratic and we were hit by worms, which we did not expect. As a result, all the crops have failed and the garden that produces up to 50 bags has given me only 2 bags.
And all of these factors are increasing the cost of healthy products like fruit, vegetables, and meat. That means food affordability has fallen rapidly in recent years. The situation as it is cannot continue. New technologies may offer some solutions, but whether changes are revolutionary or grassroots, they need to come soon before even more people succumb to starvation.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Oakland, California in the United States is Frederic Mousseau. He's Policy Director at the Oakland Institute, where he coordinates the Institute's research on land rights, food, agriculture, and international institutions. In Nairobi, in Kenya, is Ruth Oniang'o. She's Editor-in-Chief and founder of the African Journal of Food, Agriculture, Nutrition and Development. Monika Tothova is the Senior Economist for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. She joins us from Rome. And here with me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is Anna Locke, Senior Research Associate in the Global Risks and Resilience Programme. That's at the Overseas Development Institute, which is an independent UK-based think tank. I'll come to you first, Anna. I read a report in Time magazine which said if you take all of the chronically hungry people in this world and if they form their own nation, that would be the 3rd largest country in the world by population. How have we got here?
Yes, I mean, I can imagine that's true when we have figures saying that in 2022, about 735 million people faced hunger, chronic undernourishment. How have we got here? Actually, just to say we're doing better than we were 20 years ago. We're doing worse than we were doing 10 years ago, and the trend is not a good one. We're going in the wrong direction. It is a combination of sort of underlying issues with the food systems, a lack of resilience, a lack of real vulnerability to shocks and stresses, a concentration of production and consumption around a few staple products. And obviously, in recent years, we've had some real shocks from regional conflict, particularly the invasion of Ukraine, and also the pandemic, which really has knocked us back in terms of hunger and food insecurity.
Thanks, Anna. Ruth, we see adverse weather, climate change, political instability, soaring prices. Which of these issues do you think is the number one that we should be tackling?
You know, all these issues have been there. You know, each time we want to say we are addressing hunger, poverty, and malnutrition, we think we are making some headway, we make some pledges, and then something else happens, and we keep just piling problems on the previous ones. We don't seem to be moving forward. But right now, I can tell you that the climate issue is really bad, but also our partners from the past cannot help us anymore because of other conflicts that are going on that we are all aware of right now.
Monika, what do you think our world leaders should be doing? I mean, we see lots of headlines, $1 million here, $1 million there, helping these countries that always seem to need help, but we don't ever seem to tackle the problem at source. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, you know, $1 million here, $1 million there, it is good money, but it is a BandAid solution. And often these solutions are going towards addressing acute food insecurity, right? By definition, we are talking about the acute and chronic food insecurity. What Anna mentioned in her introduction was the figure from the 2023 report, which captured the developments in hunger in 2022. So, what we are looking at are problems that are underlining, right? You have a low agricultural productivity. You have increased occurrence of weather events. You have agri-food system that is not quite resilient. And if you get a shock into it, this is what happens. Now, what are the main three drivers of food crisis? It is the conflict, it is the climate issues or the weather events or whatever you wish to call them, and it is economic factors. Now, these three factors do not happen alone. If you have a conflict in a specific country, then obviously before you know it, you have economic issues that will be piling up on deeper economic issues that will be piling up. It has been shown on several occasions that, for example, the weather-related events and the conflict are related. So without addressing these underlying factors, we are not really going to get anywhere. And as Anna said, the trends are not looking right that we will achieve the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals of eliminating hunger by 2030.
Frederic, that's a very interesting phrase, BandAid Solutions. Do you feel that we need major surgery here to finally get on top of this issue?
Of course we do. If you look at the World Food Programme in 2023, the budget was 20 billion, and they were able only to raise 14 billion to help people in 80 countries, 300 million people. And at the same time, we see that corporate profit, which have been really at the heart of the core of the increase in food prices in the past few years, have surged by tens of billions in the same time. So the major surgery that a number of organizations, including Oxfam, have recommended is to really tackle this rising profit of food corporations, to be able to channel these resources to organizations like the FAO, like the World Food Programme, but also governments which are trying to address the food insecurity and hunger in their countries. It is so important to know that today we have record levels of food production, we have record levels of stocks. We never had so much food produced in the world as we have at the moment, and yet we have hundreds of millions of people suffering from hunger. So we really need to understand why is the production this big and people still suffering and still subject to all kind of vulnerabilities, and especially the volatility of prices, which really affects consumers in Africa, but also in Europe, in all over the world. We face the same issues with people being really captured by the market and market forces, which really play their game on them.
Anna, I read a statistic that said 40% of all food produced goes in the bin. It's never eaten. And yet we have so many millions of people chronically hungry. I mean, it's quite shameful, some of the behaviour we see in Western countries.
I think you touch on a really good point, which is that food production, consumption, distribution is really skewed. And it's food loss and waste. So it's losing crops in the field because farmers don't have adequate storage in low-income countries. In richer countries or in segments of the population where there is more income, disposable income, yes, we do get a lot of food waste. I think consumer education is a big part of it. I think it just touches on this, as I said, is unequal distribution and access to food and attitudes towards food as well. Because it's not only that we're wasting the food, it's that there's a lot of overconsumption in the first place. We are now at a situation that the number of overweight and obese people in the world is greater than the number that are hungry. And that is not to say that we should not be focusing our attention on reducing hunger. We absolutely have to do that. But we have to look at, why there are over 1 billion people in the world who are either overweight and obese and consuming unhealthy, highly processed foods. There's just something that is very skewed in the food system as it operates at the moment.
Ruth, we live in a very unequal world, don't we? Where in Western countries, governments are trying to tackle obesity epidemics. And in many African nations, we have millions of children going hungry day after day. I mean, it's a pretty desperate state of affairs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this has been going on for a long time. I've worked in this field for a long time, and each time we have big world meetings and then pledges, and I go back to Africa, and it's still the same thing. I think there isn't enough political will, there isn't enough resources, and even those which are pledged do not actually reach where they should. And we have a lot of smallholder farmers in Africa who used to feed Africa, but right now they are the ones actually in dire need. And then when you put on that on top of the current economic situation, no jobs, relying on imports, it just doesn't make sense. So I just feel that, yes, it's an unequal world, and some of it is just self-inflicted, and there's not enough will, really. And I believe that the West, the North, should do better with our governments, and then our governments should take it up and make sure that we have better distribution. We support farmers, and we support the whole value chain. We have a lot of young people right now who don't have jobs, and but they could do a lot along that value chain. But we need resources, and we need some. I don't know who would think about that, but many times it just goes on deaf ears, really.
Monika, there's one word that just keeps popping up in this conversation. It's distribution. So am I right in saying that planet Earth produces enough food to feed us all, but we're not distributing it fairly or evenly?
Well, if you could distribute the food, let's say, at no cost, right, globally on an aggregate, obviously there is enough food to feed everybody. We are talking, the wheat production has been shaping up really well. You observe that back in 2022, right after the war in Ukraine started, we observed a peak in the price that is gone. Prices are decreasing. Generally, prices of agricultural commodities are decreasing, and they are now what they were before the pandemic. However, production, people seem to like wheat, right? People, regardless where they are, often have a preference for wheat in form of bread, in form of bakery products, etc., etc. This wheat, unfortunately, there are parts of the world where, due to climatic reasons, you cannot really produce this wheat, right? I mean, you cannot. It doesn't really grow. So the countries, they do have the citizens do have the taste of the wheat. They want to buy wheat. So this wheat has to be imported. So one way that has been discussed is encouraging more consumption of local grains. for example, before the local diets were based on a specific grain that was more locally grown, and that's what people were eating. With the globalization had a lot of good aspects, and it still has a lot of good aspects, but you also have this aspect of tastes, of preferences that have developed across the globe, that people tend to demand similar things. So it does cost resources to ship, it does cost resources to distribute, to process, etc., etc. So globally there is enough food, there might not, and there is not enough food locally.
Well, you mentioned the war in Ukraine. That did trigger a global food crisis. So as Ukraine's exports slumped, world prices for grain soared. Ukraine is one of the world's major grain producers. Most of its wheat goes to some of the poorest countries in the world. Last year, this included Ethiopia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia, and Djibouti. Ukraine's grain production dropped by 29% in the first year of the war. Frederic, just give us your impression of the Ukraine war and its impact on world food problems.
I'm glad you're raising this point, because it's been really difficult to get the right narrative around Ukraine. Actually, it did send food to these few countries you mentioned, but only 3% of the food exported by Ukraine went to low-income countries. The bulk of it went to Europe and China. And there's been really a difficult narrative when we hear so much officials and in the media, or we need the food from Ukraine to feed the world because there's going to be a global food crisis, people are going to starve in Africa. And actually, no, the food from Ukraine hasn't been going to Africa. Only 2% of the World Food Program imports were from, only 2% of the Ukrainian grain went to World Food Program. I mean, so there's been a real lack of understanding of what was happening with Ukraine, which eventually decreased a little bit its production, but most of it remained stable thanks to the different initiatives that took place. And the prices in 2022, 2023, the food prices that rose on international markets, as we were told, because of the war in Ukraine, it has been now very clearly demonstrated that the prices went up because of speculations and because of increased profit margins from corporations. So these are really the issues we need to tackle. The Ukraine war has an impact on some of the trade, but it's very, very insignificant when you think of, for instance, how much food is going into waste, as you said, but also into feed. You know that like 30 to 40% of the food is not eaten by humans, but by cattle. So what do we do with this food? How much food is going into fuel? You know, in the US here, the production of ethanol from corn has increased 100 times in the past 20 years. It means that 40% of the corn produced in the US goes into ethanol, into the gas tanks of the cars. And this is far more than whatever Ukraine is exporting or not exporting. So we need to put all the factors of food insecurity and having this broader picture on the global food situation before going into conclusions such as the war in Ukraine is going to starve the world.
Ruth, what's your impression of the war in Ukraine and its impact on African countries and, say, grain supply, wheat going into African countries that need it?
Well, I'm surprised, just like Frederic has said, it seems like a lot of the grain did not even come to Africa. But I learned that we were missing out on fertilizer, edible oils, to use in the food processing industry. And so, yes, that has affected us badly. But I would like to believe that these wars that are going on around the world, this should be a wake-up call for Africa. And I know that since Corona and Monika has mentioned about diverse diets, nutrition, and so on, people have really picked up on a better nutrition. It's just not a question of eating food, but it's what kind of food are we talking about? And I know in many African countries, for sure, they have gone back and they want to go back if they had the resources to our traditional foods. They are more nutritious, they are medicinal, they are more resilient, and we can't always just depend on imports. But unfortunately, the population is growing so fast that making that shift is not that easy. Yeah, so yes, the crisis elsewhere affect us, and Africa has always had its own conflicts, and they have managed to deal with it. It's not easy at all, in a conflict situation. Yes, we have been affected as well.
Anna, talking of those conflicts, by the end of this year, we're likely to see famine in places as diverse as Sudan, Yemen, and Gaza. And all of this is man-made.
Man-made, well, I would say yes, some of those are man-made through the conflicts themselves. Some of them are man-made through the climate change that has really undermined the resilience of the systems. Obviously in Gaza, that is a completely different, different situation. We're not talking necessarily about climate change there. Yes, I mean, I think, but I think it was Monika that said right at the beginning that a lot of these factors come together. You have the conflicts can be linked to climate change because there's increasing fighting over shrinking resources, or resources are put under strain. There are those economic factors that if you have rising food prices, and general energy prices, again, there's just going to be putting those economic systems and livelihoods under strain. So I'm not an expert in Yemen and Sudan, and certainly not on Gaza, so I can't comment on the multiple factors.
By the end of this year, we're looking at millions of people facing dire situation.
Yes, and that's something we've got to remember actually when we look behind those numbers of millions. We've got to remember two things: that there's a human face to every single one of those 735 or 800 million people, and that we're talking, when we're talking about hunger, we're talking about severe hunger, we're talking about people just not actually being able to survive, and we're talking about severe stunting, wasting in children who will never recover from that.
Monika, do you get the impression Western politicians actually care? We hear lots of conferences and money pledged, and we're not sure whether it arrives. Is there a genuine will to fix this problem?
I might not be the right person to answer the question, and whether they care. I do believe that there is interest in resolving the issue. There is an interest in addressing the underlying causes. If for nothing else, the loom of the SDG of the 2030 is practically behind the corner, if you think about it. And we are really not in track in addressing in even achieving or approaching the achievement of the zero hunger goal. There are parts of the world that made progress, but there are still parts of the world that need to make significant progress in achieving the zero hunger. In Food and Agriculture Organization, we often say that, if you are with distributing, of course, with the acute food insecurity and the people you just mentioned in the what we call catastrophic level of hunger in the IPC qualification, that's going to the famine and eventually death, then you need something that solves the problem right away, distributing food, addressing, providing vouchers to the market if the markets are functioning. It depends on a specific situation in the country. But to solve the underlying concern, we need to improve the agriculture, agri-food systems. We need to improve the production. We need to strengthen the production systems in the country. Now, we maintain that the trade is good and the countries can still import, but you also need to have a solid agriculture base in the country where the small farmers that the Ruth mentioned can thrive, they can produce, they can market their products. So without empowering them, we are not going to solve the matter.
Ruth, we'd love to end on a positive note. Give us some positivity. What can you see changing for the better?
Positive, positive. Positive is that we need to take care of each other. You know, SDG 17 is partnerships. And you know, the UN does a great job of bringing us all together. But at the end of the day, we need political will. We need those who pledge to actually give those funds and then to make sure they know where the funds are going. Those funds do not reach the level, the ground where smallholder farmers are. They cannot improve their farming systems, and the young people cannot get jobs over there. And we just need our governments to know that without feeding your people, your citizens, nutritionally, without doing that, they cannot be good citizens, and even your politics cannot be good. So it's my appeal is that we can all do this. We just need political will from all of us. And you people in the West, especially, let me address you. You know, when you do all these pledges, pledges, go find those who work directly on the ground, and we are there. Find them and make sure that the resources are actually reaching where they are. We just haven't done this right at all. I'm sorry, yes, yeah.
Ruth, Monika, Frederic and Anna, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.